himself to the end zone. Caught. Touchdown.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Straight Outta WAC Pigskin podcast. I'm your boy, the Rev. I'm not the God or the Czar, as been posted on the page today, but I am the Rev. So my partner in crime, Kyle, is unfortunately out today because life gets in the way. So it wasn't just me by myself. I thought I'd open this up and we could just talk. We could talk about WAC sports, or we can talk about other things. If you want to call Chris Hammond the hack, you can call Chris Hammond the hack. I don't think he's a hack, but if you want to do it, go ahead. So first of all, unfortunately, I can't see who the Facebook user is, but thanks for the support for that. So I'm going to go through real quick just a recap of last week's games and then this week's games. And I already see one real good question here that I want to answer. So real quick, last week, there's only really two games within the conference. We had Abilene Christian beating Lamar 24-17. With that game, I think some people were a little bit surprised about the score because when they played previously, Abilene Christian took Lamar to the woodshed, beat them 56-0. But Abilene Christian did lose Stone Earl to injury. They had Peyton Mansell coming in and running the show instead. And also, too, it's really hard to beat teams, twice a season or even three times a year in the case of South Dakota State and Southern Illinois this calendar year. But, Abilene Christian got their win, even without their starting quarterbacks. So, it was kind of, I think it was surprised. Kyle said he thought the game would be close. I said it would be a blowout, and Kyle was right. So props to you, Kyle, for that one. But Abilene Christian, Lamar, 24-17, Abilene Christian, nice win. And then the other one was the battle of the two teams moving up. Tarleton went to St. George to play Dixie State. Tarleton won that one handily, 41-20. That was more of a blowout than the score indicates, to be honest with you. I will say Tarleton was up big early, and then Dixie State kind of got some second half trash or garbage time scores. The shout out, though, for Tarleton's quarterback, Stephen Duncan. The guy went 21 for 30, 299 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And then Jay McDonald on the ground had 14 rushing attempts for 173 yards and a touchdown. So big win for Tarleton State. I think as they finish transitioning, they're going to be a pest within the conference. They're going to be one of the teams that competes year over year because they were that good at D2, and now they're going to be this good at Division I, I think. So real quick, I guess let's go into the games for next week. There's 4 on the WAC schedule. I'm going to save the best one for last, I think, but we have Central Arkansas, part of that WAC Sun competition. They're facing Lamar. Central Arkansas needs this win to keep their playoff hopes alive. Losing this past week in the Eastern Kentucky really hurt them. I don't know if a 7-4 team is going to make the playoffs this year as the field currently stands. I think it's one of the things we have to see just how it all plays out. But this is another do or die. But I think they'll get the win against Lamar just because Lamar is not very good. Midwestern State travels to Stephenville and takes on Tarleton. Now, this is actually a really interesting game because Midwestern State and Tarleton both were strong D2 programs. It's a good rivalry. And while Tarleton's won the last 3, Midwestern State's ranked in the D2 poll. I think they're ranked 18th right now. So this could easily be a D2 scalp over an FCS team. So that would be a good one to watch. I recommend doing it. That one's at 5:00 on Central Time on ESPN Plus. Definitely check that one out. And then lastly, my alma mater, the Lumberjacks, they travel to Dixie State. They're coming off a bye after SFA's coming off a bye after 2 heartbreaking losses in the fourth quarter, and the games they should have won against Sam Houston and Jacksonville State. They really should have won Jacksonville State game, because if you look at the stats, they completely outperformed them. But it's what it is. Dixie State, I said I would shout them out all the time, and I'm going to. Yes, they haven't got a win this year, but yes, they also are playing a tough schedule. I'm working on trying to get their athletic director on the podcast at some point, because I want to talk to him about transitioning and running the schedule. And then the game of the week, the most important game, because there's a lot of playoff implications. This one, the Jacksonville State Gamecocks, they travel to Bowers and Huntsville to take on Sam Houston. And that's at 1:00 on ESPN Plus. I think it's Sam Houston's homecoming. I'm not 100% sure. So Sam, guys, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this one's important for Jacksonville State. This is another one of the ones where if they don't win this one, their playoff hopes are probably dashed as well. I don't see a 4-loss team making it into the playoffs. And I mean, I know they beat Florida State, a very down Florida State, but they've also had losses that they shouldn't have had this year. So, this is huge. Sam, another thing about Sam, I'm interested to see how they're handling injuries coming off their bye week, because Eric Schmidt's been knocked around. He was under concussion protocol. He played, I think, some against Lamar, but they had Shoemaker in for a lot of that game. And then Jaquez Ezzard left the game against Lamar early he was in the first half. He was injured and he left. And now I'm starting to wonder if potentially we're seeing some wear and tear happen on Sam with the amount of games they played this calendar year. I know there's spring ball, but like just in regular year, there's spring ball and things like that. But Sam's up to like 16 games, I think, this calendar year. And that's not like a full calendar year. That's in 6 months. And that is a lot of wear and tear. Is it an excuse? No, but I kind of wonder too if teams are getting a little tired. I think Sam, like I've said before, Sam taking that second bye week has probably helped them out immensely. So this will be a good game in Huntsville. I recommend catching it. I, granted, will not be in Huntsville because I try not to go to Huntsville for any reason. I will be at a beer drinking festival, but I will be following this game on my phone just to see how it turns out. I don't think Jacksonville State has enough of a team to beat Sam Houston. I mean, I would love to see them do it just for the chaos that would ensue. But, Jacksonville State's such a Jekyll and Hyde type team. You don't know who you're going to get. And granted, they beat SFA, but they really beat SFA. They got up 14-0 in the game off of great defensive play, and then their offense just became stagnant. And they can't do that against Sam Houston. They have to come in and they're going to have to move the balls. Derek Cooper is going to have to find a way to score points, and their defense is going to have to hold against a very, very potent offense. So whilst I would love to see Jacksonville State pull the upset just for the chaos that would ensue with the polls, I don't see it happening. I think Sam Houston's going to win that one easily, double digits probably. And that would then knock Jacksonville State probably out of playoff contention. So I guess before we go into the one question we have, and please, if you pop onto this and you have more questions, ask them because I would like to kill some more time. But if let's look at playoff implications for the AQ7. Now, obviously, Sam right now controls their own destiny. They are undefeated. They're number one in the polls. If you look at some of the other ones, some places have them 3, but the stats and the coaches poll, they're number 1, and people argue that they deserve it or not. I think in my personal poll, I don't have them as 1. I have them as 2. I actually have Eastern Washington as number 1. But I think you can argue that Sam has played well enough to deserve the number 1 poll ranking. Now, if they deserve a top 2 seed, that's another discussion, which we can have if someone wants to talk about it. But if we look at the second place spot in the AQ7, it's getting a little convoluted because right now that spot belongs to Eastern Kentucky. Now, Eastern Kentucky, they had a great win against UCA this past weekend. They had a nice comeback on that. And so they're looking really good so far, but they also lost to Indiana State early in the season. And so that's a concern. Granted, what you do week 1 and what you do week 8 or week 7 or whatever it is, I mean, you can change as a team, you have different things happen. But I don't know if Eastern Kentucky can win 2 of their last 3, that gauntlet that they have where they play SFA, where they play Jacksonville State, and then where they play Jacksonville State, they play SFA, they play Sam Houston. They have those not in that order. I think it actually goes Sam, SFA, Jacksonville State to end the season. But if they can win 2 of those last 3, they would be in a good spot to get a at-large bid for the playoffs, and it would completely at that point knock out the other teams from playoff contention, including SFA. Because even if SFA were to win every other game except for the EKU game, they'd be 7-4, and they wouldn't be in the playoffs because they wouldn't have a marquee win. Now, if SFA were to run the rest of their schedule up to that game, then EKU were to run the rest of their schedule up to that game, then that makes that game really interesting, because that game would be for de facto who's going to get an 8-3, potentially get an 8-3 record and get the at-large bid and have to probably go play someone like Southeast Louisiana first round. So it would be really interesting to watch how the AQ7 playoffs, the playoff stuff unfolds. And, it's what makes it fun. Jason, this is actually a really good question. It really is confusing. Jason asked, is it confusing that we have the WAC standings, the ASUN standings, and AQ7 standings? And yes, it kind of is. But I believe that each conference is wanting to award a trophy to the team that wins from their conference. So I think that's why they're tracking it. It can also be a little confusing too, because in the WAC standings, they have Tarleton State and Dixie as well in the WAC standings, and they're not, eligible, but they're still counting into the standings. So from a watching a perspective, yeah, it gets a little bit confusing. But I understand why they're doing it. It makes sense why they would track it both ways, so they can award the trophy. This is the one time I think they're doing it, because I think next year the ASUN with the rest of the additions, they're going to be playoff eligible right off the bat, while the WAC is going to have to get some sort of waiver or something to get an auto qualifier. But the other thing too is that if the WAC has a good enough team, if they have a team like Sam going like they are, or if they have a team like, say, SFA finishes 9-2 next year, would they really actually need an auto qualifier? No, because they would still get in no matter what. So I think the auto qualifier thing is just a safety valve, but I don't think the conference is weak enough to where the team who's going to win the conference is going to be like 6-5 and begging for a playoff spot. I don't see someone, the conference winner, getting a treatment like that. I think whoever wins in the conference will be good enough to have it on their own. So this is a good question from the Facebook user. Unfortunately, I can't see who you are, but shout out to you, because I really like this question. So it's project the WAC 3 years out. What's the conference look like, and who are the top 3 teams down the road? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the conference, because first of all, the WAC is adding Southern Utah, right? So for football, they're going to have Southern Utah, they're going to have Dixie State and Utah, and then they're going to have the Texas 4, as it's called, plus Tarleton. So the Texas 5. So that gives you 7 teams. But then also UT Rio Grande Valley, which is one of the larger schools in Texas. It's down in the valley of South Texas. They are in the middle doing a referendum to add football. So if they were to add football and they get it added in 2024, that puts the WAC at 8. And when we had our conversation with Jeff Hurt last week, he alluded to this. Now it makes you wonder if the WAC would go after some other schools or not to get to 9 football playing teams and 14 basketball playing schools. I wonder who they would go after. Also, too, with some of the realignment talk we've heard today at FPS, that puts some of the weaker Conference USA schools in a really bad bind. I almost wonder what I'm not going to say that the WAC should mix with CUSA, because I think that's actually a really bad plan. But it kind of makes the whole realignment piece a little bit more interesting than it was. I'm not the WAC, but there's some really great schools that they could add in. I don't know. I think some people said, hey, add McNeese, and McNeese is great from from a program, from a history standpoint. I don't know if they'd want to be broken away from the other Louisiana schools, though. That would, I mean, at least from an athletic standpoint, I'd say add them. But again, there's a lot of politics behind the Louisiana schools, and I don't know if they would do it or not. There's some other options like bringing in a school like West Texas A&M up for D2. West Texas A&M is a great D2 powerhouse. Would be a great D1 addition. They're kind of in the center of the conference. I could see them adding, but I almost wonder too if we should look at some schools that are maybe outliers in the Big Sky. They may not be the strongest programs, but if you look at a geographic type fit, they might make more sense in having them in the WAC. Now, I don't think you would see a school like Weber State go, although it would be great for the rivalry up I-15 in Utah. But I think Weber State is tied into the Big Sky. But then there's schools like Northern Arizona. There's schools like Northern Colorado, not powerhouses by any means, but they would fit into the geography. So eventually, I think you'll see the WAC the WAC will eventually have 8 schools for sure. Now, and maybe 9. Now, the other part of the question is who are the top 3 teams? Well, it's really hard to say that Sam Houston wouldn't be the top team. Just because of what they have built over the past decade as a football program, with Willie Fritz as their coach, and then after he left, bringing in Casey Keeler, like they have built a great tradition and a great powerhouse and a great program. They put in all the tools to remain a top program with the folks they've hired, especially with like their strength and conditioning and things like that. So it's really hard to say Sam wouldn't remain up there. Now it'd be interesting too. I actually put this question on Facebook. I was like, Keeler's 62 years old. How much time does he have left? And Jamie Williams said he's still got tread on his tires. So I think we'll probably see him stick around some. So after that, who'd be number 2? And you could say as long as SFA is on the trajectory they're on, they would be number 2. Colby Carthos has come in and turned that program around. And I'm not saying that from bias. I'm just saying that from straight fact. If you look at over the past 3 seasons, they've improved year over year. Granted, 2020, 4 of their wins came against Division II schools because they played a fall schedule. But again, they also hung in with their FBS opponents. And then they got wins against Abilene Christian and Eastern Kentucky. So I think if Carthel can lay down the groundwork to help sustain a program, because he's going to get poached if he makes SFA a success. If you were to get SFA even remotely close to a national championship, I think he would get poached. I would be surprised if Texas Tech hasn't already been looking at him after the SFA Texas Tech game, especially because of his West Texas ties. Now, granted, Coach Carthel, if you're watching, don't leave because we need you to stay for a little bit. So I'd say SFA is probably 2. And then the third team, that's a tough one. And I think it's going to be either one of the 2. I think it's either going to be Abilene Christian or it's going to be Tarleton. And the reason why is, Tarleton has been year over year a very strong Division II program. They have always been in the top 25. They've gone far into D2 playoffs. They have great facilities. Maybe not the best facilities, but they have pretty darn good facilities in Stephenville. I could see them easily, keeping their D2 success and easily competing at a higher level. Now, Abilene Christian's an interesting one because Abilene Christian, they've got, I believe it's a new stadium that they're playing in. They've always had talent. I think it's just a matter of coaching. But I know they're turning it around out there. They're actually, I would say Abilene Christian has looked pretty good this year. Granted, they have played some weak competition while playing like Louisiana College and UT Permian Basin. But, first half of the game against Central Arkansas, they looked really good. They just lost in the second half, right? When they played Eastern Kentucky, sort of the same thing. Although Eastern Kentucky, again, I think Eastern Kentucky is a lot better than people have given them credit for, myself included. But I think as someone that has said down here, they do have potential. They absolutely do have potential. And so I think that would be your 3. It's going to be a battle between Tarleton and Abilene Christian. It's going to be fun to watch, though. That's what makes me excited about WAC football because, we've got Southern Utah coming in. We've got Dixie State moving up and, sharpening their skills. So, that's it. I'm going to be, like I said, as we get further down 5 years, 10 years, it'd be interesting to see what happens with the conference and if they try to go back FBS. I don't know if all the schools want that or not, but Chris Hammond had a show on the Football Chris show, shameless plug for you, Chris, about a month ago about realignment. And it was with him and another fine gentleman. And thanks, Jason. For those of you who care, the Astros are losing. So anyway, they had a discussion about the WAC and FBS. So what's interesting is that the WAC, the Big West Conference, which is now a basketball-only conference, and the Missouri Valley Conference, not the Missouri Valley Football Conference, the Missouri Valley Basketball Conference, like they have in their bylaws the ability to plant their flag at the FBS level. Now, there's some stuff that goes into that, but they essentially don't need an invite. They can turn around and do it. Now, granted, the Big West hasn't hosted basketball hasn't hosted football in 20 years, and the Missouri Valley Conference, not the Missouri Valley Football Conference, hasn't hosted football themselves since like the 80s, I think. So I don't see either one of those two doing it, but it's kind of interesting to see what the WAC could do. Now, I think a lot of the schools that are in the WAC would need major facilities upgrades to do it. But it'll be interesting to see if with everything's happening in conference realignment, with everything's happening with if you look at the top level with the Power 4, because let's be honest here, guys, the Big 12 is not a power conference anymore. Sorry. So the Power 4 and then the Big 12 right below it, and then the rest of the G5. It's kind of interesting to see what could potentially happen there and what sort of new layers of college football you have. And then they said the WAC can look at it and say, hey, we want to do this, or hey, we don't want to do this. So that's what I think is going to happen in the next 5 years. So that was a great question. Whomever asked that, and I apologize because I can't see you, but shout out to you. So these two questions kind of go together. One is Eastern Kentucky, the real deal, for those of you who are like, why are you talking about Eastern Kentucky on a WAC podcast? Well, here's why. Remember, the WAC's part of the AQ7. So who, in your opinion, stands the best chance to be the number 2 team in the AQ7? Because as we said right now, as it goes right now, Sam Houston is number 1. So, and I don't see Sam Houston stumbling. Like historically, Sam Houston has stumbled against teams like Lamar, and they've already beat Lamar. So they've got that covered. So, sorry, let me take that off. I'm still also figuring out how to make all this fun stuff work. So, Sam, I mean, I don't see Sam gets past Jacksonville State. I think they could play their second stringers and coast because they're playing Dixie State. They've still got Abilene Christian. They have Eastern Kentucky. I wouldn't play their second stringers there, but they could give Jaquez Edwards some rest. They could give Eric Schmidt some rest and help get them healthy for the playoffs. So Sam's your number 1. We've already said that. We pass that. So number 2, this is where it gets interesting, because if you look at it right now, I'm going to say this: if teams win out, if SFA wins out, they finish 8-3. If Jacksonville State wins out, they would finish 8-3. If UCA wins out, they would finish 7-4. And if Eastern Kentucky wins out, I think they'd finish 8-3. Also, off the top of my head, they might be 9-2. I'm trying to think. It might be a 9-2 type thing. So I think it comes down. Right now, it's kind of hard to say. I think it's a 3-horse race between Eastern Kentucky, Jacksonville State, and Stephen F. Austin. Now, what has to happen here is, one, Jacksonville State has to decide what kind of team they're going to be. Are they going to be Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, right? Are they going to be the team that has the promise and the potential that we see with the players they have, or are they going to let John Graw are they going to let John Graw be John Graw and keep them from being the next? It'd be John Grass. Anyway, that guy, he doesn't need to be their coach, and that's for you, Brandon Owens, because I know you're watching this. So Jacksonville State, one, if they can pull an upset against Sam Houston, that would be huge. But I think if they lose to Sam, that puts them at 7-4, like I said, and that's going to completely derail any playoff potential. So now you get to Stephen F. Austin. Now, so Stephen F. Austin, the toughest remaining games on their schedule, they have to go to Conway and play UCA on the Stripes, and the Stripes are notoriously hard to win on for the most part. And then they also get Eastern Kentucky in Nacogdoches. Now, they need to win all of these games because they need to win these games because they would have to win out and be 8-3. And Jason, you bring up a good question, so I'm going to bring this one up here. Why do I discount 7-4 teams for the playoffs? I discount them from the AQ7 as a 7-4 team. I don't think if you're a 7-4 AQ7 team, you're going to have the resume to get in. So that's really it. I don't know. I could be wrong. We could see one get in, but I don't know if they would take a second place AQ7 at 7-4 versus a 7-4 Valley team or 7-4 Colonial Athletic team or 7-4 Big Sky. So, and that is a bit of a bias towards those conferences, but those conferences also tend to play tougher schedules. They have higher competition, but I didn't mean to get distracted from the question that was asked. I just saw this one pop up and it kind of tied to what I was saying. So Stephen F. Austin have to win out 8-3. If they lose another game, their playoff hopes are done. So, and then Eastern Kentucky would be in the driver's seat. But again, they have to go through the gauntlet still. They still have Sam Houston, Stephen F. Austin, Jacksonville State to end their season. So that's a rough 3-game stretch. And 2 of those games are on the road. I believe they go to Huntsville for the Sam game, and then they go to Nacogdoches for the SFA game. And I believe they had Jacksonville State and Richmond. So that's a rough road to have. If they go through that, I think they would. I think you could see them make a pretty decent run in the playoffs. If they get 2 out of those 3, they're going to make the playoffs. So it really, to answer the question, I think the team with the strongest chance of making the playoffs at the moment as an at-large bid is Eastern Kentucky. But of course, we still have a lot of football left. So there's a good question too. Does a chance that AQ7 only gets 1 bid? I don't know. I just said that a 7-4 probably wouldn't get in. So if we have teams at 7-4, I don't know. It kind of depends on what the rest of the landscape looks like. You know, if we see upsets, if we see things like that, I don't know. I think it's still too early to tell. I think the AQ7 gets 2, but I really think they need one of the teams to have at least an 8-3 record to solidify the opportunity to get 2. But that was a really great question also. Let me clear some of these out so I don't lose all of them. Here's a good one. What's up, Marcus? So does Sam make a deep run in the playoffs if they don't have home field advantage? Yes and no. And I'm going to try to say this without you guys going, "Oh man, you're a Sam hater," because I mean, I do. I don't hate Sam, the school, the team. I think I have respect for the team, but I hate Sam, the school. Anyway, let's go to this now. Sam Houston has not lost in the playoffs at Bowers ever in their history. So just remember that. That's what helped them, I think, in the spring, especially with some of the games that they had. I mean, come on, if they had been down, what was it, 21-3, 20, I can't remember what the score was at half to James Madison. Would they, and they had been in Harrisonburg, would they have come back and won that game? Don't know, because playing at Bridgeforth is a tough place to play. If they had been, would they have won in Fargo? I mean, you can ask these questions because Bowers gives Sam an insane home field advantage, and they take advantage of it. And it's basically the equivalent of the South version of Fargo when it comes to playoff football. Now, if we look at seeding at the moment, and this is where I'm going to get called a hater or I'm not. I've said that Sam should be ranked 1 or 2 in the polls. Like, I have no problem with them being 1 in the stats or coaches poll. I don't have them at 1 in mine just because I think Eastern Washington's a better team right now. But I can see them being 2. When it comes to playoff football, when it comes to building the resume, when it comes to building out the seeds, they're going to look at resumes. And let's be honest here, Sam Houston, even if they go undefeated, doesn't have as good of a resume as Eastern Washington and as North Dakota State if those 2 teams go undefeated. Now, granted, they may not. Eastern Washington's got some tough parts of their schedule because they've still got Montana State, they've still got Weber State, And I think they get both those in Cheney, but then they also have to go on the road to UC Davis. And granted, yes, UC Davis lost to Idaho State, but UC Davis is not a weak program. They're a tough team. So those are tough ones to. That's a tough one for them. But if they go undefeated, then yes, Sam is not going to get a one or two seed, because North Dakota, it would go Eastern Washington, North Dakota State 2. And that also assumes North Dakota State goes undefeated and they win the marker game and all that. And I also wonder, too, if South Dakota State were to win the marker game, but South Dakota State vaults over Sam in terms of their resume with the FBS win and everything else. I don't think it's a good question, And with all that, and with saying that Sam Houston wouldn't get a 1 or 2 seed, it's not hatred against Sam. It's the fact that they got screwed over by the rest of the AQ7, because Jacksonville State managed to plummet out of the rankings and hang around in the 25 piece, right? SFA came up, but now they're kind of hovering in the others receiving votes area, right? Central Arkansas, God knows what's happened to them this year, but they have not been good. So Sam is kind of getting punished by their other conference mates basically imploding. And it's not a fair thing to Sam, but Sam also, too, yet if we look at their out-of-conference schedule, they played Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona beat Arizona in a Pac-12, and a win over a Pac-12 team is a win over a Pac-12 team, even though Arizona is garbage in the Pac-12, right? But that same Northern Arizona team lost to Northern Colorado. That same Northern Colorado team lost to Lamar, and Lamar is awful. Sorry, Lamar fans, but you guys are not good. Okay, so Northern Arizona is not that high quality of a win. Southeastern Missouri is not that high quality of a win. And then they have 2 bye weeks. I've said this before, they did a smart move by taking 2 byes for health reasons, but that does hurt them in terms of their strength of schedule. If you look at their strength of schedule in Sagarin ratings, it keeps dropping week over week. And it's not, like I said, it's not their fault. It's just the hand they were dealt. But resumes a huge part of seeding. And if Sam fans, you don't believe me, I want you to think back to spring of this year, because who was number 1 in the polls when the playoff field was announced? It wasn't South Dakota State, who got the number 1 seed. It wasn't Sam Houston. They were ranked 4th in the nation, and Sam Houston got number 2 seed. It was James Madison. James Madison was the number 1 team at the time. James Madison got a 3 seed because they didn't play anybody in the spring because of how COVID worked, the scheduling, and they had to sort of stay in that CAA pod. And fortunately for them, but the pod that they were in wasn't a strong one. They had to play Elon. They had to play, they weren't playing tough schools, and that hurts whenever you get to playoff seedings. And so I think that same analytics that my normal podcast partner Kyle hates, it's going to be the thing that kind of bites Sam in the rear this year, because that same logic is going to work against them. So, Marcus, if the season were to end today, I think Sam would have a 3 seed. If Eastern Washington and North Dakota State go undefeated, I still think Sam Houston has a 3 seed. If one of them were to stumble, then that makes things interesting. So that's where I'm going to leave it as. We'll redress this later. We still have, a month's worth of football to play, but I mean, this is getting exciting. Even if you're not a fan of a school who's probably going to be in the playoffs, it gets exciting to watch and see what's going on with this. But that was a real great question. I really liked it. Somebody said UCA was the biggest disappointment, and yeah. I was going to mention the 2 byes. You don't disagree with me. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to go through and figure out kind of where everything sort of stands. Do I like Princeton minus 300 against Harvard? Man, ooh, that's tough. That's a tough one. That's actually a tough one to choose. Princeton at 300 against Harvard. I think I would probably take Princeton. That's truly a pick'em game. Gosh, I think I would take Princeton. I would take Princeton over Harvard, I think. Ivy League. Hey man, listen, we joke about the Ivy League. We talk about them with rankings and everything else. So Ivy League football is getting interesting. to watch. Yes, I know it's not the WAC, but because right now you've got Harvard, you've got Princeton, and you've got Dartmouth, who are all killing it in their conference and in their out of conference. So, I mean, Friday night's going to be a real good match with Dartmouth and crap. Now I forgot who Dartmouth is playing, but there's a good Friday, a good little. I think it's Columbia maybe. So Dartmouth and Columbia Friday night on ESPN Plus. So I think you should check that one out. We got another question. So what do you think happens as far as playoffs are concerned if this were to happen? Sam Houston beats JSU, EKU beats Sam Houston, and JSU beats EKU. Sam Houston, EKU, and JSU would have one conference loss each and would win the rest of the remaining games. Sam Houston's 9-1, JSU, EKU 8-3, EKU's 8-3, JSU 7-4. That's a great scenario. I like it. Well, I'll tell you one thing: Sam wouldn't be getting a top 4 seed if that happens. That any sort of loss is going to hurt Sam. They would get a 5 through 8 if they get a seed at all. So either way, even with that scenario, Sam Houston would still. When you come down to tiebreakers, I do believe Sam Houston would still get the auto bid. Now, what makes this interesting about second and third here is would both these teams make the playoffs? Eastern Kentucky, I think, would be in. Jacksonville State, I don't know. I think that would be one of those kind of ones where if they got in, there's another team that feels like they would deservingly be in, and they would feel like they got the McNeese treatment a few years ago or the Lehigh treatment a few years ago, where they had a good enough record to get in, but didn't because of someone else. But with that scenario, I do believe Sam Houston would still, with all the tiebreakers, Sam Houston would still get the auto bid for the conference. And then I think you'd see EKU go in, and then Jacksonville State's a maybe. I don't know. That FBS win really helps Jacksonville State, but they also lost to UT Martin, who granted is top 25, so that may not hurt too bad. It just kind of depends on how that goes. I think I'm going to take that one of the things I said earlier. I think if Jacksonville State finishes off 7-4, and they were to somehow beat Eastern Kentucky, I think you could see them potentially getting into the playoffs. So there's the answer to that one. Let's see. Love SFA versus Dixie State. Me too. SFA is that's going to be a double-digit win for SFA. So yeah, I think that's it. If you have any more questions, I'll stay on here for just a second. I would before we go though, I would like to give a shout out to the FCS Fans Nation group, all of y'all on Facebook, even the folks like Zane Thrift who don't like me. Thanks for going on to that site, to that page, and making it great. We're almost at 10,000 members, which is really awesome. Also too, you're watching this live on YouTube, or those of you who are watching it live on YouTube, if you haven't liked and subscribed, I hope you do, because not only do you have to see my ugly mug, but you get to see the FCS Fans Nation podcast, which comes out usually late Sunday night. You get to see Around the ASUN with Will and Brandon, which is a great one. Plus Brandon does Cocky Nation if you want to talk Jacksonville State, stuff. You get to see all the boys from South Dakota, the Jackrabbit Illustrated, and then my boy Brendan and Ben and the B team. There's such great content right now on this page, and it's because of y'all that we get to do it, because FCS is still ground roots compared to everything else, and it's the support of you guys that we're able to do these awesome podcasts. So shout out to the admin, shout out to the FCS Fans Nation page. I'm going to let you guys go because I want to get another beer. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. We'll talk next week. Have a great rest of your night.